Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive that'll really get you thinking.
Oh yeah, this one is a wild ride.
We're talking about justice, the legal system, and a story that might make you wonder if the truth always comes out on top.
It's a case that really shows you how fragile justice can be, especially when people in power care more about winning than about the truth.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're going deep into a Joe Rogan Experience podcast episode.
Oh yeah, that's a great source for this kind of stuff.
It features Josh Dubin, a lawyer who's dedicated his whole career to fighting wrongful convictions, and J.D. Tomlinson, the former prosecuting attorney of Lorain County, Ohio.
Having both sides there, the defense attorney and the former prosecutor, makes this conversation super insightful.
It really does. They're discussing the case of the Ohio four men who were convicted of a brutal murder back in the 1990s.
A case full of inconsistencies, a key witness who admitted to lying, and maybe even some political stuff going on that's keeping two of those guys behind bars even today.
It's a story that raises some serious questions about accountability bias and the very foundations of our legal system.
Big questions for sure.
So let's rewind back to 1995 in Lorain County, Ohio.
Okay, back in time we go.
A woman named Marcia Blakely is found murdered in her apartment.
Tragic.
It's a horrific scene, and the community is understandably shaken, and the police are under immense pressure to find the people who did it.
Yeah, you can imagine that pressure to solve a big case like that can sometimes lead to cutting corners and focusing on just getting a conviction, even if it means missing important details or ignoring red flags.
And that's exactly what seems to have happened in this case. Initially, the police had very little to go on, no strong leads, no DNA evidence, nothing concrete.
So they're scrambling to find something, anything to break the case open.
And that's when William Avery Jr. enters the picture.
Oh, here we go.
He claims to have information about the murder and points the finger at 4 men.
Let me guess, this is where things start to get messy.
You got it. Avery Jr. quickly becomes the prosecution's star witness.
Of course he does.
But his story is anything but airtight.
I was about to say, there's always a catch.
Right from the start, there are inconsistencies in his account, things that should have raised major concerns for the prosecution.
Like what kind of inconsistencies?
Well, for example, he describes this big, violent struggle inside Blakely's apartment. But when the police arrive, the apartment is perfectly neat.
Wait, hold on. So he's saying there was a fight, but the place looks untouched.
Exactly. No signs of a struggle, no furniture overturned, nothing to back up Avery Jr.'s claims.
That's a pretty huge red flag. How could they ignore that?
It's a glaring discrepancy that you'd think would make them question his whole story.
Yeah, you'd think so, but for some reason the prosecution seems to just look past these red flags.
It's important to remember that prosecutors, like all of us, can fall prey to cognitive biases, especially when they're under pressure to win a case.
Right. They might subconsciously focus on evidence that fits their theory, even if that evidence is shaky or unreliable.
And in this case, the evidence from Avery Jr. gets even shakier during the first trial.
Oh, this is where it gets good. Tell me more.
Picture this, the prosecution's star witness, the guy their whole case rests on, takes the stand and admits he made the whole thing up.
Seriously. He just comes out and says he lied.
He tells the court he fabricated his entire story for the reward money. Wow, that's a complete disaster for the prosecution. You'd think that would be the end of the case, right?
You would, but it's not. The prosecution, for reasons that are still unclear, decides to keep going with the trials even after their star witness has basically imploded.
What? Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense.
It's mind-boggling. They keep Avery Jr. detained, give him some time to cool off, as Dubin puts it, and then, surprise, surprise, his story changes.
Oh, come on. So now he's changing his story to fit what the prosecution wants.
It really makes you wonder if he was pressured or coached into changing his story to fit their narrative. It's a troubling possibility that shows how the system can be abused.
Yeah, that's definitely a big concern, and it gets even more troubling because, get this, the lead prosecutor gets a letter from the U.S. Secret Service informing him that Avery Jr. had been working for them as a paid informant.
You're kidding. So not only is this guy a proven liar, he's also been paid to give information before.
And they knew that. The prosecution knew that.
They knew that he had a history of lying and fabricating information. So now they have even more reason to doubt his credibility, yet they still choose to build their case on his word.
This is unbelievable. It suggests that getting a conviction was more important to them than actually finding out the truth.
And tragically, all 4 men are convicted based solely on the word of a man who has been proven time and time again to be unreliable.
This is just heartbreaking. They were sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
25 years to life based on nothing but the word of a liar. It's a complete failure of the justice system.
It really shows how Once someone is accused, especially in a high-profile case, it can be almost impossible to overcome that initial label of guilt, even when the evidence just isn't there.
They become known as the Ohio Four lives, completely shattered by a system that seems to have failed them at every turn.
It's a story that should make everyone pause and think about how we ensure that justice is truly served.
Years go by, and the Ohio Four are still behind bars.
Stuck in a system that's failed them.
Their lives completely on hold for something they say they didn't do.
It's hard to fathom.
And then enters Josh Dubin.
The guy who's going to shake things up.
He's a lawyer who specializes in wrongful convictions, and he takes on their case determined to get to the bottom of it.
Determined to find the truth.
The thing that strikes him right away is the lack of physical evidence.
And the fact that the whole case hinges on Avery Jr.'s story.
Which keeps changing.
Right, the story that already fell apart once.
As Dubin digs deeper into the case files, he finds even more reasons to question the convictions.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals something even more rotten.
Exactly. Remember how Avery Jr. recanted his testimony during the first trial?
Yeah, the moment their star witness imploded.
Well, it turns out that wasn't the only time he admitted to lying.
Oh, there's more.
Back in 2004, Avery Jr. confessed to the FBI that he had made up the entire story.
So he admitted to the FBI that he lied about the Ohio Four.
He said he implicated them because of pressure from his father.
Wow, so this isn't just a recantation. It's a full-blown confession documented by the FBI.
It completely dismantles the prosecution's case.
Talk about undermining the whole thing.
He even signed a sworn affidavit reiterating his confession and saying how sorry he was for what he'd done.
He basically admitted to ruining these men's lives.
And get this, he even told reporters outside the courthouse that he made the whole thing up.
So he was publicly admitting to his lies.
You would think that with this new evidence, the case against the Ohio Four would be thrown out immediately.
It seems like a slam-dunk case of innocence, right?
And as we've seen, the road to justice is rarely smooth.
There are always roadblocks, detours, and unexpected turns.
Sadly, the legal system doesn't always like to admit when it's wrong.
It can be really hard to overturn a conviction, even when there's clear evidence of a mistake.
Especially in a high-profile case like this, where overturning the convictions would raise questions about the competence and integrity of everyone involved in the original case.
Nobody wants to admit they messed up, especially when the stakes are this high.
And during a post-conviction hearing, things get even more frustrating.
Oh no, what happened?
The judge presiding over the hearing puts enormous pressure on Avery Jr.
Pressure to do what? To stick to his original story.
Pretty much, he basically threatens him with perjury charges if he testifies that the Ohio Four are innocent.
Wow, so he's basically being told he'll be punished if he tells the truth?
Avery Jr., terrified of the legal consequences, refuses to testify.
It's understandable he's in a lose-lose situation.
He knows he's lied, but he's also being threatened with legal action if he admits it.
So Dubin and the Ohio Four are stuck. They have the truth, but the system is trying to silence it.
It highlights the immense power that judges have in the courtroom.
Yeah, they have a huge responsibility to ensure fairness, but they're also human and can be influenced by biases or pressure.
It's a reminder that even within a system that's supposed to uphold justice, human fallibility can have devastating consequences.
And this is where another key player enters the story.
J.D. Tomlinson.
The former prosecuting attorney.
As a young lawyer, he was actually there at that post-conviction hearing where Avery Jr. refused to testify.
So he witnessed this whole thing firsthand.
And something about the case, about the obvious injustice, stayed with him for years.
It clearly made an impact on him even back then.
Fast forward to 2023, Tomlinson is now the prosecuting attorney for Lorain County.
So he's in a position to actually do something about this case.
But here's the thing, he's also facing his own legal battles. He's been publicly accused of felonies charges he strongly denies.
Talk about irony, he's been wrongfully accused himself.
This experience of being falsely accused seems to have a huge impact on him.
It probably gave him a whole new understanding of how fragile the system is.
And how devastating false accusations can be.
He knows firsthand what it's like to have your life turned upside down by something that's not true.
And this experience seems to have made him more open to Dubin's arguments about the Ohio Four.
It's like he can relate to their situation in a way that most people can't.
Remember, Tomlinson had already overturned another wrongful conviction in Lorain County back in 2022, the case of Nancy Smith and Joseph Allen.
That case shows that Tomlinson is willing to challenge the status quo and right past wrongs.
Even if it means admitting that the system he represents made a mistake.
That takes guts.
The Smith case was especially disturbing. It involved fabricated accusations of child sexual abuse, and Tomlinson, after reviewing the evidence, was convinced that Smith and Allen were innocent.
That's a really tough situation to be in, especially as a prosecutor.
He publicly apologized to them in court.
A rare and courageous act for someone in his position.
But doing the right thing earned him some serious backlash from law enforcement and other prosecutors.
It's like they were punishing him for exposing their mistakes.
But despite the potential for more backlash, Tomlinson agrees to meet with Dubin and review the evidence in the Ohio 4 case.
He's willing to take the risk to see if justice can be served.
Dubin comes prepared with a meticulously organized case file, laying out all the problems with Avery Jr.'s testimony, the recantations, the lack of physical evidence, everything.
He's got all his ducks in a row.
And Tomlinson doesn't just listen passively.
He really digs into it.
He visits the crime scene, pores over trial transcripts, does everything he can to understand the complexities of the case.
He's not taking any shortcuts. He wants to be sure.
And what he finds troubles him deeply.
The more he learns, the more convinced he becomes.
He even shares a quote from the federal court that had reviewed Al Cleveland's case.
What did the federal court say?
They acknowledged the likelihood of his innocence and highlighted the lack of evidence against him.
That's huge coming from the federal court.
Oh.
It lends a lot of weight to the argument that Cleveland was wrongfully convicted.
Convinced of the men's innocence, Tomlinson decides to take an extraordinary step.
He's going to do something big.
He agrees to file a joint motion with the defense counsel to grant the Ohio 4 a new trial and dismiss the charges.
Wow. A joint motion from the prosecution and the defense that's practically unheard of.
It's a massive win for Dubin, the Ohio 4, and for justice itself.
It seems like finally, after all these years, the truth is going to prevail.
But just when it looks like the story might have a happy ending, things take another dark turn.
Of course they do. This case is full of twists and turns.
It's like a roller coaster ride. You're going up, and then suddenly you're plummeting back down.
And it makes you wonder if there are people working behind the scenes to keep these men in prison.
Just as they're about to file, the joint motion forces within the system start pushing back.
It's like a knee-jerk reaction to protect the system and the people who got it wrong in the first place.
First, there's an article in the local paper, the Chronicle-Telegram.
Oh no, what did it say?
It quotes the newly elected Lorain County prosecutor, Tony Sillo.
Sillo, the guy who replaced Tomlinson.
He expresses doubts about the Ohio 4's claims of innocence.
Wait, so the new prosecutor doesn't believe they're innocent?
He seems resistant to the idea that his former colleagues who worked in the same office might have made a mistake.
That's a pretty big red flag right there. It suggests that there might be a culture within that prosecutor's office of protecting their own, even if it means ignoring the truth.
And then to make matters worse, the Ohio Attorney General gets involved.
The Attorney General? Why would they get involved in a local case like this?
It's unusual. The Attorney General files a brief asking the court to delay ruling on the joint motion until Sillo takes office.
So they're trying to stall the process.
This intervention from the Attorney General raises serious questions about their motivations.
It could be that they genuinely want Sillo to have a chance to review the case, but it could also be a way to give him time to try to influence the outcome.
It's a concerning development that adds another layer of complexity to this already messy case.
It just keeps getting more and more complicated.
Now, the judge presiding over the case, Chris Cook, initially seems to agree that delaying the ruling is unnecessary.
So he's on the side of justice moving forward.
He even issues an order criticizing the Attorney General's request for a delay.
He's not playing around.
There's this line in his order where he says, the concept that a court, or any government entity for that matter, should come to a grinding halt because a newly elected official will be taking over is not how government should or does work.
He's basically saying that justice shouldn't be held hostage by politics.
It's a glimmer of hope, a sign that maybe the system will do the right thing.
But don't get your hopes up too high.
You're right. Because in a shocking turn of events just 3 days later, Judge Cook issues a new order that completely contradicts his previous stance.
Wait, what? He changed his mind.
He does a complete 180.
What made him change his mind so suddenly?
Now he's saying that a change in the county prosecutor does justify a delay, and that Sillo should have the opportunity to review the case before any decision is made.
That's unbelievable. It's like something happened behind the scenes to pressure him into changing his stance.
It's incredibly suspicious.
Did someone threaten him? Did they offer him something? We need answers.
And to make things even more unsettling, Judge Cook brings up the Nancy Smith case.
The case where Tomlinson exonerated those wrongfully convicted of child abuse.
Yeah, he uses that case as a reason why the Ohio 4's case should be delayed.
It's like he's implying that Tomlinson's willingness to overturn convictions is a problem.
It's a subtle but very disturbing message.
It suggests there are people within the judiciary who see overturning convictions as a threat, even when those convictions are clearly wrong.
It's a chilling thought, and as if Judge Cook's reversal wasn't bad enough, another judge involved in the case, the same judge who had presided over Al Cleveland's post-conviction hearing and had pressured Avery Jr. not to testify outright, denies the joint motion for a new trial
Without even holding a hearing.
without even considering the evidence.
That's a blatant abuse of power and a complete disregard for due process.
It's a clear sign that something is deeply wrong within the Lorain County justice system.
It's like they're closing ranks, protecting their own, and sacrificing justice in the process.
It's a nightmare scenario for Dubin and the Ohio Four.
Their hopes for freedom, which seems so close, are suddenly slipping away.
They're up against a system that seems determined to protect itself, even if it means keeping innocent men behind bars.
It's a stark reminder that power can corrupt and that those in positions of authority don't always use their power for good.
It's like every time there's a little bit of hope in this case, something comes along and just crushes it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there are people who are actually trying to keep these men in prison.
Like they're actively working against justice.
It definitely raises questions about whether some folks in the Lorain County justice system are more worried about saving face and looking good than they are about actually doing what's right.
It's like they're more concerned with protecting their own reputations than with getting to the truth.
Exactly. And the resistance to reopening this case is strong.
It really is. And it gets even worse because Silo's first move as the new prosecutor is to withdraw the joint motion that Tomlinson had filed.
Oh, wow. Talk about a slap in the face.
It's a huge blow to the Ohio Four and their hopes for a new trial.
It's like he's slamming the door shut on justice.
Silo's decision to withdraw that motion really reinforces the idea that he's not interested in finding out the truth.
It's like he's more focused on protecting his office's reputation than on making sure innocent people aren't punished.
Which begs the question, why would he be so against a new trial if he truly believed the original convictions were solid?
Right. It just doesn't make sense unless he's got something to hide.
It's so frustrating. But despite all these setbacks, Dubin's not giving up.
Good. He can't let him get away with this.
He's filed public records requests trying to dig up any communication between Silo and the Attorney General.
Trying to find out what's going on behind the scenes.
He wants to expose their reasons for getting involved in the case and maybe even uncover any shady deals or political maneuvering that might be at play.
That's a smart move. Exposing what's happening behind closed doors could be the key to finally getting some answers in this case.
It's all about transparency, right?
Absolutely. And Dubin isn't just focusing on legal strategies. He's also trying to appeal to Silo's conscience.
Trying to get him to do the right thing.
He's urging Silo to take another look at the case, to really examine the evidence and to think about the human impact of his decisions.
He's even offered Silo a chance to come on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast.
Wait, the same podcast we're talking about now?
Yep, to present his side of the story, to show any evidence he might have against the Ohio Four.
Wow, that's a bold move by Dubin.
Yeah.
It shows how committed he is to finding the truth.
It's a risky strategy, but it could be what it takes to break through the silence and get some real answers.
If Silo agrees, he could expose the flaws in his position. And if he refuses, it'll just make him look even more suspicious.
It's a gamble for sure, but sadly, the reality is that 2 of the Ohio Four, Lenworth Edwards and Benson Davis, are still in prison.
Still paying the price for a crime they say they didn't commit.
Their lives are on hold while the people in power seem content to just ignore their case.
It's a heartbreaking example of how wrongful convictions don't just impact the individuals involved, but also their families and communities.
It makes you question the whole idea of justice, doesn't it?
It really does.
Al Cleveland and John Edwards were eventually released on parole, but they still have those convictions hanging over their heads.
They're still labeled as murderers, even though they maintain their innocence.
Their lives, their families, their reputations have all been deeply affected by this ordeal.
It's a tragedy that highlights the urgent need for reforms in our justice system. We need to do better to prevent wrongful convictions and to ensure that the innocent aren't punished.
So what can we take away from this deep dive? What does this all mean for us?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we can't just blindly trust this system to always get it right.
We have to be engaged, we have to ask questions, and we have to demand transparency.
We have to be willing to speak out against injustice wherever we see it.
We can't just sit back and assume that someone else will fix the problems in our justice system.
We all have a role to play in making sure that justice is truly served.
If this deep dive has made you want to learn more about the case, you can find more information online, including the website freetheohio4.com.
It's a story that deserves attention, and hopefully it'll spark some important conversations about how we can prevent these kinds of injustices from happening in the future.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you a lot to think about.
And maybe even inspired you to get involved in the fight for justice.
Because justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility we all share.
By being informed, engaged, and willing to challenge the status quo, we can work towards a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Thanks for listening.